Welcome to Métamorphose, the podcast that awakens awareness. I am Anne Guéquière, author and editor of projects committed to a new world. Every week, we go together to discover a bright subject with a guest that carries a voice of awareness. Thank you for being with us today.
Métamorphose. Awaken your consciousness.
My guest today is a human potential explorer, a revealer of scientific discoveries that validate spiritual concepts. Known for centuries, he has traveled the world to meet mystics of different faiths and explored libraries in temples and monasteries to answer the fundamental question, who are we? He is internationally renowned as a pioneer, bridging modern science, ancient wisdom, and human potential, and is a 5-time New York Times best-selling author. His latest book is The Wisdom Codes. Hi, Gregg Braden. I'm thrilled to have you today in Metamorphose podcast. Welcome.
Oh, Anne, it is so good to hear your voice. I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm thrilled to be on your podcast. And I want to say hello to our audience before we begin. I know we have listeners from all over the world, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. This is unrehearsed, so I'm going to follow your lead, and we will explore where we're going to explore together here.
Thank you so much. Alors, we start with your latest book, The Wisdom Codes. Is about neurolinguistics and how to use it. You said the language that we use determines the way that we think, and that words are directly linked to the neurons in our brains. So can you tell us more about the power of language?
Sure. This was it was a very healing book for me to write, and it was over 40 years that I was researching this book, and it is a compilation from many different indigenous traditions that I've had the opportunity to spend time with, exploring the power of words and the power of words literally to not only determine what we think, but the science now is telling us the words we use determine what we are even capable of thinking about, what we even can conceive as a possibility is determined by the words that we use. So this is new science in neurology and neurolinguistics that is now revealing that the words we use determine how the neurons in our brain, and now we know there are neurons in the heart. So how the neurons in the heart and the brain, how they connect and fire together to release the chemistry into our bodies that matches the words. So what we know is that scientists tell us that we speak in words, we say words to ourselves silently in our mind between 60 and 80,000 times every day. And those words are directing the way that the neurons wire and fire together. So this was especially interesting to me because I know from the indigenous traditions that I've visited that we have always had words that we turn to in times of need. Our ancestors have always had words or phrases that they would turn to in times of loss, or when they felt that they needed protection, or when they needed to find inner strength in the presence of a life challenge. There were always certain words that they turned to, and those words have worked and they've been preserved in the prayers, in the hymns, in the chants, in the mantras of our ancient and indigenous traditions. And what I did was I collated those together in sections. So there is a section in the book on loss, and there's a section on love, and there's a section on fear and loss, I said loss, a section on inner strength, and more. And the science now is telling us why these word patterns work. So when we merge the science that's telling us why these patterns work with the wisdom of our past that has preserved the words and the patterns and the hymns and the prayers, it gives us access to the benefits that have worked so well for so many people for so very long. So That is in essence what the book is all about.
And thank you. Can you give us examples of how we can use them in the everyday life?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And before I do that, can I tell a little bit about how the discovery was made? Are you okay if I do that?
Of course, sure.
Yeah, this is really interesting. It was in the early part of the 20th century. It was in the mid-1930s, Yale University, when a professor took a sabbatical and needed someone to replace and teach his students for a semester. And he asked a friend of his who did not typically teach university courses to substitute for him. And the man's name was Benjamin Lee Whorf. And some of our listeners may be familiar with Benjamin Lee Whorf if you've ever studied linguistics, because it was during this time that he made the very powerful discovery that this book is based upon. So Benjamin Lee Whorf began teaching the course on Native American language, and he chose specifically the Hopi language from North America. And one of the first things that he discovered, Anne, was that the Hopi have no words to describe the future, no words to describe the past. Their language, their language is all based only in the present moment. And from the Hopi way of thinking, we live in a universe that is alive. It is a living universe. It is happening present in the moment. And that is reflected in their worldview because they see everything is connected. They see harmony in the universe. They see harmony in nature and in their communities. And they see cooperation. And they work very cooperatively because of this worldview. We, on the other hand, I'm speaking from the United States. My primary language is English. And the English language and many of the what are called the Romance languages are based in separation. In the Western languages, there's you and me, and here and there, and then and now, and right and wrong. And this forms our worldview where we see ourselves as separate from the world and separate from one another. It doesn't mean that we cannot transcend that. We can choose to move beyond the limitations of our language. But this is an interesting discovery in the indigenous languages, how words actually trigger the wiring of the neurons, the way they connect. And those neurons then build a neural network and release the chemistry into the body that reflects this language of unity, this language of connection, and this language of cooperation. So I think it's a fascinating discovery. And when I went into the languages, I drew upon many traditions, and I drew upon the mysterious words that were etched into the tombs under one of the pyramids in Egypt, the words to guide the soul into the next life. I drew upon the Hindu traditions and the Buddhist traditions and the Native American traditions, as well as the Hebrew traditions and the ancient Gnostic traditions and the Christian traditions, because all of these are part of our history of using words to help us to heal and to give us strength and power and insight in times of need. So I just wanted to share that the background. This is the way the universe works. The man that made the discovery was not even the university professor, but he was asked to come and explore something he didn't understand. And when he did, this is the discovery that he made. So you asked me for an example. So I'm going to use another example.
Is it what you call unity thinking?
It is unity thinking. And, I'm hesitating because I don't know how much time we actually have, Anne, but I want to share just a concept. There is an emerging scientific philosophy that consciousness informs itself through its creations. So what that means is we create the things in our lives, in our culture, in our civilization that tell us what we believe that we need to understand in the moment. So that means our music, our books, our art is more than entertainment. while those things may entertain us, they're also telling us, reminding us something about ourselves that's important in the moment, and that applies to movies. So if you begin looking at the movies that have been made recently, and you begin looking at the movies that are the most popular, especially among young people, movies about humans with superpowers are huge hits because we all feel that we have some kind of a hidden power within us. Well, when it comes to the words that we use, there was actually a movie that was made just a couple of years ago about this concept of words. The movie was called The Arrival.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting movie, very complex, but it was about life from another world that appears on Earth at precisely the time the people of the Earth are divided and going to war. And the beings that come from another world give the people of the Earth a language. And the Earth scientists, are saying, okay, what's the big deal? Why is this so important? And then they begin to understand, and it was the actress Amy Adams is the one that stars in this, and she was the linguist. She discovers that the words we use determine whether or not we cooperate or whether or not we have conflict, whether or not we work together or have war to solve our problems. So here was a movie, a blockbuster movie that was shown all over the world, reminding us of the power of the language that we have to either unify us or to separate and divide us. And it came at a time when, in fact, the world is very divided right now. Societies are divided, nations are divided, and we all know that. So I think it's very interesting, Anne, that this emerging philosophy that we inform ourselves, we remind ourselves of what is important to us through the things that we create and surround ourselves with. If we don't know that, we think it's just entertainment and diversions. But if we begin to look at our entertainment and our diversions as information to tell us something about ourselves, think of the movie The Matrix. The movie The Matrix told us that there's a world we cannot see that influences the world we can see. The movie Avatar told us about our deep relationship with nature and the earth. So it's a very interesting exercise in looking at what we create and what our creations may be telling us.
Yeah. And to come back to the examples of everyday life, how can we use the words?
Sure. I'm just going to choose one example. And it is an example that I use pretty much on a daily basis. And since I discovered this pattern, I have used it for almost a quarter of a century now. It is based in a prayer from the Navajo tradition. The Navajo is an indigenous tradition in northwestern New Mexico and parts of Arizona here in the United States.
Yeah.
And it is called the Beauty Prayer. So the Navajo see beauty as something more than an aesthetic that, we look at something and we say, oh, that's beautiful. For them, beauty is a force of nature. And for them, we are changed in the presence of beauty. And now the science is telling us why that's true, because when we feel that something is beautiful, that feeling changes the chemistry in our bodies, and we literally begin to release different kinds of chemistry in the presence of beauty. We truly are changed in the presence of beauty. And that idea, that discovery, is the foundation for why this ancient prayer is so powerful. So I will just use the English words, the beauty prayer. There are 3 phrases. So let me share the phrases, and then I'll share what it is that those phrases tell us about ourselves.
Yeah.
So the 3 phrases, the first one simply says, the beauty that I live with. The second phrase is the beauty that I live by. The third phrase is the beauty upon which I base my life. That's the beauty prayer, the abbreviated version of the beauty prayer in English. The beauty that I live with. What that says to us, Anne, is that beauty already exists. Beauty exists in everything. We don't have to create it. Our job is to find it. Our job is to seek out the beauty in all things. And it's about our perspective, how we choose to see the events in life. That's the beauty I live with, the beauty I live by.
The first one is how I can recognize the beauty around me.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example in just a moment. I'll go through these and give you a perfect example. So the beauty I live with is that first phrase. The beauty I live by reminds us that it is our choice as to whether or not we view the world through the lens of beauty or through the lens of hate or through the lens of good and evil. It's our choice. The beauty that we live by reminds us that it's up to us to choose the perspective of beauty that serves us in our lives. The beauty upon which I base my life invites us to allow beauty to become a cornerstone, a foundation in our lives upon which we base our choices, our decisions, our relationships. It is an invitation for us to view all things through the lens of beauty. And it changes the way we think about things, and it changes the way we think about ourselves when we embrace this. A beautiful example, Mother Teresa. I studied Mother Teresa when she was alive.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by her life.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, well, she had the organization called the Sisters of Charity, and they were based in Calcutta, India, and they would make it a practice to wake up before the sunrise in the morning, and they would go into the streets of Calcutta, and they would search for the people who had been thrown out of their homes by their families because they were called the untouchables. They were the ones that were ill, they were diseased. Many people didn't even know what the disease was, and they were left in the streets to die. And Mother Teresa and the sisters would find these people. They would pick them up to take them back to the sanctuary where they were. They would bathe them. They would dress them in white gowns so that they could die in dignity for whatever length of time they had. If they had a few moments, if they had a few hours or a few days, they would die in dignity. And Mother Teresa tells the story. When they would go into the streets were filthy. The stench and the dung, the cow dung in the gutters and the garbage and the trash. And Mother Teresa would see a flower growing out of the gutter, out of the trash and the stench and the dung. And in that flower, she would find beauty, and she would say there's beauty in the streets of Calcutta, because she chose to see the beauty through the lens of the flower rather than focusing on the trash and the dung and the garbage. And it's a very powerful example of the power that beauty has, because Mother Teresa and the sisters did not get sick when they were with these people that had been thrown into the streets with diseases that weren't even identified. They didn't get sick because the beauty that they found in those people and in their mission and in the flowers that were growing in the gutter, that beauty changed the chemistry of their bodies. Beauty strengthens the immune system. Boy, who doesn't want a strong immune system right now? And beauty changes the way that we feel about ourselves, and that change triggers a cascade of chemistry in the body.
Yeah, they had no fear of those people,
No.
and probably they were loving them. So beauty, love, and no fear, it's the good cocktail, we could say.
They are all related. Beauty and love are very, very closely related. And in the presence of beauty and love, there is no fear in the presence of beauty and love. So this is one example of one of the prayers in the book. And I use this almost every day. The beauty that I live with tells me that I can find beauty in the most difficult circumstances. If I have a tough phone call, if I have a difficult conversation with a loved one in a relationship, COVID-19 and the lockdown is really pushing people emotionally and psychologically and physiologically and mentally and spiritually, pushing people to the very edge, to the boundaries of their perceptions, who they believe they are and what they believe is possible. And it is an opportunity to practice in our lives the principles that we claim to be true in our hearts. For me, it's been an opportunity to practice in my life what I share from the stage to other people. And I have to tell you, and this stuff works. If it didn't work, I couldn't talk about it. I would not be as healthy as I am. And it's been an opportunity to really implement in my personal life. And I have many people that I know. I'll just be very honest. We all know this. A lot of people are having a difficult time. Some people, their lives are so difficult, they want to end their lives. And the number of people taking their lives is increasing. And I've had phone calls from those people. And if I were in the same state of mind that they were in, it would be very difficult to help them. So the beauty prayer is just one aspect. The Hindu traditions, there is the Gayatri mantra that is part of this book. There's Om Namah Shivaya that is part of this book. These are chants that I know many of our listeners are familiar with. The Christian, in the Gnostic and the Christian prayers, the book of Psalms is a very, very different kind of book in the biblical traditions. Because all of the other books of the Bible, all of the other books are records of people asking for help, feeling powerless, and they're called supplication. They're writings of supplication, where the people of the earth feel insignificant and powerless and they ask God for help. The book of Psalms is just the opposite. The book of Psalms is where the people of the earth are proclaiming. The Psalms are essentially ready-made prayers, proclaiming that we are one with this world. We are one with God. And when we begin to read those Psalms, the 23rd Psalm is a beautiful example. The Lord is my shepherd. That's a very, very powerful, invokes a very powerful sense, because our idea of the shepherd is that we're cared for. Or the 91st Psalm is also called the soldier's prayer. And the 91st Psalm has been used throughout history. Entire armies and have memorized the 91st Psalm before they went into battle the next day to protect them on the battlefield. And statistically, those armies have come out much better than the other armies have. We don't know for sure why that is, but the 91st Psalm has been a powerful source of refuge and protection for a very, very long time. It was written, it's fascinating. The 91st Psalm was written by Moses when he was climbing Mount Sinai for the second time to receive the Ten Commandments, if you believe the historic texts. And as he was climbing the second time, something happened to him that did not happen the first time he climbed the mountain. This cloud appeared from nowhere, and it surrounded him. It enveloped him. He could not see outside of the cloud, and the people below the mountain could not see him inside the cloud. He had no idea what was happening to him, and he was frightened. And in the presence of that fear, he created, personally, I think he channeled the 91st Psalm. And he recited that psalm over and over and over again, and it gave him the sense, the feeling of protection that allowed him to finish his ascent to the top of Mount Sinai and to receive what we now know as the Ten Commandments. So that's the origins of the 91st Psalm. So the thinking is that if that prayer has been so effective and powerful that it served Moses in the way that it did, and if it served all of the people between his time and our time, and it served all of the enemies, the armies that have used this as well, if it worked for them, then that prayer can work for us in our lives. And this is where the source of inspiration comes from for so many people.
And it's very powerful because you're telling me one of the of my leading sentences in my life. Lord is my shepherd, and in the translation in French would be like, I don't miss anything. I mean, I have the abundance. I don't know how can I translate it in English better than that, but since I was like 20 years old, I have it everywhere.
Well, and this is...
It's a great synchronicity, you know?
Well, yes, we've never had this conversation, but it's fascinating because when I did the research for this book, so each chant, every mantra, every hymn, every prayer, I state the prayer in the original language, and then I talk about the history and where it comes from. David, the biblical David, is the one that wrote the 91st Psalm, and he was a shepherd early in his life. And this imagery of a shepherd that cares for his flock is so powerful because when we say those words, we associate those words with being cared for. And the original text, before it was translated, does not say, I shall not. It doesn't say that because that was the translation that was coming during the time of the church, early, when that translation was made. What it says, it doesn't say I shall not as a command. It says I want not. So in other words, I have everything I need already. The Lord is my shepherd and I have everything that I need in my life. And that, to me, leaves a little bit different kind of feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But this is the neurolinguistics, because we associate very specific meanings with those words. Some of the meanings are from our personal experience. Some of them are from our collective experience. Some of them are just in the human psyche. When you say certain words, those words link into the energy in consciousness for the human psyche that has been passed down for hundreds of thousands of years. And we feel different in the presence of those words. So now the science tells us that feeling, when you have a feeling, you're creating what's called a neuropeptide. It's a very specific kind of chemical in the human body. And we create very specific neuropeptides to match the feelings that we are having. And this is why we are physiologically changed in the presence of beauty, for example, or we are physiologically changed in the presence of certain words. When we begin to feel safe, that feeling becomes a safe chemistry in our bodies, and we begin to release the chemistry of healing and regeneration and rejuvenation when we're safe. If we're not safe, then we focus on the chemistry of fight or flight. So this is adrenaline and cortisol. I know you've spoken with Bruce Lipton on this program, my dear friend and colleague, and he talks about this very eloquently. So there is a power in the words and the patterns of words that our ancestors have used that have been preserved through the mantras and the chants and the prayers and the hymns that have been spoken throughout time. And the science now is helping us to understand what this relationship is. And once we understand that relationship, then we know what to do more of to be more effective. And then maybe the things that are less effective, we don't do so much of those things.
Yeah. And I want to go to another question. Why answering the question, who am I, is so important for you, and maybe now more than ever?
I'm not sure how long I have to answer this question. Is this a 30-minute podcast, or do we go longer?
Yeah, we can go longer. We can go up to 1 hour.
Oh, okay. So when we ask the question, who am I as an individual? Who are we collectively?
Yeah.
We are the product of a story. And individually and collectively, we have been taught a story. Our story is the way that we think about ourselves. Our story comes from our family. Our story comes from school, from university, from science, from religion. Our story comes from our culture. We all have a story through which we think of ourselves. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's not conscious. But here's the thing, we live our lives based upon the way we think of ourselves, based upon our story. We choose our relationships. Every intimate relationship, the people that we invite into our lives as grown-ups, the people we invite into our bed, I mean, that gets very, very personal very fast. It's based upon the way we have been taught to think about ourselves, the way we solve our problems, the way we heal our bodies. It's all based upon our story. So our story, historically, in the modern world, in the West, has been a story of separation, powerlessness, helplessness. We have been taught that we are the product of random mutations. This is called the Darwinian theory.
Yeah.
That we are the product of some lucky biology that happened a long time ago. And this is important. We've been taught that competition and struggle is the foundation of our existence. And this is important because these teachings emerged in the mid-1800s. 1859 is when Charles Darwin published his book on the origin of species. And people say to me, Greg, 1859, that was a long time ago. So what? What difference does that make today? And it's a very, very good question. And the answer surprises people because the foundation of our modern society, the world that we live in, here we are in the 21st century, we've got internet and high tech and, iPhones and everything. But the foundation of our society was put in place in the late 1800s, in the early 1900s, when Darwin's ideas were published and when they were embraced. So these ideas of competition, conflict, struggle, scarcity became the foundation of our economic system that we're struggling with right now. They became the foundation of the corporate system. And the new science, Anne, is telling us that these foundations are based upon false assumptions in science. The new science, for example, the best science of the 21st century, is telling us that nature is actually based upon a model of cooperation.
Cooperation, yeah.
Yeah, not competition. So think about this. We live on a planet of almost 8 billion people, and we're globalizing this planet in a way that we have never done. And we're trying to share vital resources of food and energy and water and medicine and communications and minerals. We're trying to share on the one hand. The other hand, it's all being done through a system that's based upon scarcity and separation and conflict and competition. It's not working. It's breaking down, and we're seeing it break down, and we're also seeing governments of the world do everything they can to prop up the system rather than allowing the system to fall so that it can make way for a new, healthy, sustainable system that's based upon cooperation and what scientists call mutual aid.
Yeah, you said that those mistakes from science are being corrected, so it's a good news.
It's interesting. Science, okay, there are two different paths of science. There are the real scientists that are working behind the scenes, making discoveries, and they're publishing them typically in very obscure journals. They're called peer-reviewed journals. They share the discoveries with their peers, with their colleagues. But those discoveries often do not make it into the mainstream. So you won't see those discoveries in the mainstream classrooms that our kids are going to or the mainstream textbooks. You won't see them on mainstream television or documentaries or in the magazines, in the newsstand at the airport. So here's what's happening. It takes time for those discoveries to trickle down into the mainstream. So the good news is some of those discoveries are, in fact, trickling down. But the reality is that the new discoveries are so very different from what we have been taught in the past that many college, university professors, and I've talked to these people. When I ask them, I'll say, why can't you share the new discoveries with your students?
Yeah.
And they say, Greg, you don't understand. They said, if we shared the new discoveries, it would overturn our entire career of maybe 40 years. They said it would change everything. It would make our life's work look like it was not worthwhile. And I said, no. I said, you're a scientist. Science is made to be updated. It is designed to be constantly updated. Science is not static. Science is a dynamic way of looking. It's always changing. And it would teach your students the value and how relevant science really is. But here's what many of those professors are saying to me. They're saying, you know what? We're going to let the new college professors deal with this problem. We're going to teach the old way of thinking until we retire. And then we're going to let the new professors, they're going to be the ones dealing with the problem.
Oh
so
my God.
we have some of those new professors that are coming along. So another place, Anne, where this is so powerful, you asked me the question, who are we?
Yeah, just a quick thought. Professors like Bruce Lipton, they did it.
Professors like Bruce Lipton. So have you also interviewed Joe Dispenza?
Yeah. No, Joe Dispenza, not at all. I would love to. Yeah,
Joe
sure.
Dispenza is a dear friend. He's a dear brother, a spiritual brother, a colleague. Bruce Lipton, myself, many others. We all made similar decisions. We were in academia and we were in the corporations. I was in the corporation. Bruce was in academia. Yeah. And what we found was that the science did not support what we were being asked to teach and what we were being asked to do in our jobs. The science didn't support it. So we made the choice to leave the universities, to leave academia, and to leave the corporations, and to take this information directly to our community. Well researched, well documented, it's good science, but we made the choice not to go through the conventional path of writing a paper and trying to publish the paper and waiting 6 or 8 years, for the paper to be reviewed and published. We are taking this information directly to our community. And the reason is because our world is changing so quickly, and we don't have 6 or 8 or 10 years to wait. We need these understandings now. We need to know, our young people need to know that nature is based upon cooperation, not competition. And if we're going to solve our problems successfully, we have to model after the natural world. Our young people need to know that the human body is not the product of random genetic mutations over a long period of time. This goes to the question, who am I? The new science, the DNA, it's called forensic DNA science. We now have the science, and we can extract DNA from the fossilized remains of the beings that are our oldest ancestors. And we can compare their DNA to our DNA today to see what has changed, and if we descended from these primitive forms of life. What the DNA is showing, number one, we did not descend from Neanderthal, for example. We shared the earth with Neanderthal, and we interbred with Neanderthal, and many of us have Neanderthal DNA in our genome. We didn't descend from them. And we didn't descend from many of the other primitive forms of life that you see in a textbook on the evolutionary tree. The DNA also tells us that what are called anatomically modern humans, the acronym is AMH, anatomically modern humans appeared on Earth mysteriously.
That's what you call DNA too?
It is DNA from the anatomically modern humans, appeared on Earth mysteriously 200,000 years ago, and their DNA and our DNA is the same. We have not changed. We did not evolve slowly, gradually over a long period of time. When we appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago, we had all of the capabilities that we have today. We had the neural network. We had the immune system. We had the same body proportions. We had the same cranial capacity. And what this tells us, Anne, is that we are not the product of random mutations that just happen to have occurred over a long period of time. Is we are the result of some kind of an intentional process. We don't know what that is. As scientists, we may have our own idea as individuals, but as scientists cannot tell us what happened. But when we look at the DNA that has been fused, the DNA that has been modified and tweaked to give us all of the capabilities we have, to give us the ability for complex speech, for example, or to give us the ability to self-regulate our immune system. We're the only form of life. We are the only form of life that can consciously choose in a moment in time to do the things that are necessary to regulate our own immune system, for example. We can strengthen the immune system through breath and through focus when we choose in a way that no other form of life can. We can awaken longevity enzymes so that we actually reverse the biological markers for aging. So we move forward. A year from now, we're a year older. We can't change that. But the biology does not deteriorate in that year. The biology actually becomes younger. Our telomeres, for example, and the bone density and the collagen density and things like that in our bodies. We're the only form of life that can self-regulate that. We're the only form of life that can create resilience to the extremes of life on demand when we choose. No other form of life can do that. And so when we begin to ask, who are we? If we can teach our young people that we are something very, very precious, we are something very special, we're not the result of random processes, and we are not the result of competition and conflict and struggle, that cooperation and mutual aid is the secret to our success. And if we begin to educate an entire generation of young people with these ideas, think how differently they would solve the problems that we are leaving behind.
Can we look toward the consciousness at that point? Because you said the words, so maybe if it's not in the DNA, how can the consciousness interact with those parameters?
Well, we are the consciousness. And as we inform our young people, as we share with our young people the deep truths of their existence, we give them the tools to not only to survive, but to thrive in the world that we're leaving behind. So here's what's happening right now, and this makes no sense. Right now, we have an entire generation of young people that are just beginning their lives. They're just graduating from high school or college. They want to make a difference in the world. We're asking them to solve the problems that we have created in our generations, and the problems that we're leaving behind, we're asking them to solve the problems through the same thinking that created the problems. This is why I think it's important for our universities to embrace the new science. It doesn't mean that we can't talk about the old discoveries. Go ahead and share with the young people, tell them Darwin's theories. Nothing wrong with that. And then share with them the new discoveries. Share everything with them because they're smart and they want to contribute to the world. And we're asking them to solve the problems without giving them the tools to solve those problems. So whether we're talking about climate or agriculture, or whether we're talking about social injustice, whether we're talking about COVID-19 and disease and pandemics, it all is based upon the way we've been taught to think, our story. And our story in the past has been a story of powerlessness, helplessness, separation. And the new story is a story that says we are empowered and we are made to adapt and thrive in times just like this. The key is we have to give our bodies what our bodies need to be at their best. And that comes down to a very deep spiritual principle. This is where science and spirituality come together, because it comes down to the way we love ourselves. So the question is, do we love ourselves enough to live our lives in the way and give our bodies what they need to be at their best so that our bodies can do what they are made to do in times just like this? And the answer to that is where the workshop of life begins. It begins with our nutrition. It begins with our movement, our exercise, our sleep, our relationships, the stress in our bodies. All of those are part of what we're talking about, part of the formula for success. Do we love ourselves enough to honor ourselves? Maybe make some changes, eat a little healthier, do a little bit more exercise, find a way to work through the relationships, find the techniques to ease the stress in the body, whether it's yoga or meditation or walking or whatever that is. We all know the formula.
That's why also you're talking a lot about heart intelligence, and you said the little big brain is in the heart.
Sure.
The seat of our existence, and you're sharing a lot of exercises to maybe use our heart differently.
Well, in 1991, scientists made a discovery. It was published in 1994. The discovery of about 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart. They're like neurons, but they're not in the brain. They're neurons in the heart. And they are concentrated in a way that creates a neural network. And so scientists literally say we have a brain in our heart. So the brain in our heart, it thinks independently of the brain in our head. It feels, it senses, it remembers, and it solves problems differently than the brain in our head. And it makes perfect sense that it would, because when you think about this, the brain in our head, we have a left and a right brain. It's a polarity brain. So it's based on right and wrong and good and bad and success and failure. It's based in the ego and all of our issues of self-esteem. The heart does not work this way. The heart is not a polarity organ. So when we learn to access the neurons in the heart, those neurons are actually connected to the field of information that connects all things. And when we learn to access information through our heart, the truth of our heart, rather than the polarity and the ego of the brain, it helps us to become objective. And when it comes to solving our problems or listening to criticism or sharing new ideas or having difficult conversations, when we can begin those conversations through the objectivity of the heart rather than the polarity of the brain, it empowers us and stacks the deck of success for a better outcome for us. And this is part of the new science, the new story that tells us who we are. But, it's interesting because almost every I'll say it this way. I have not been with every indigenous tradition in the world. Every indigenous tradition that I have been with always begin their practices in the heart, not in the brain. And for most of those indigenous traditions, they begin teaching children at a very early age how to sense the world through their heart, how to interpret the world through their heart, and then at a later time, how to interpret the world through their senses and through their brain, through the senses of vision, for example, and smell and taste. Those are secondary. They teach the heart first in these indigenous traditions. We do just the opposite. So since the time we are young, we're programmed to interpret the world through our senses, through sight and smell and sound and taste and touch. And maybe if we're lucky, at some point in our lives, we take a class or a workshop or we listen to Anne's podcast and we begin to learn that there is another way to interpret the world through the heart.
Yeah, you said that the heart knows very, very well who we are. I love that sentence. And for example, you share an exercise like breathing very deeply and slowly so we can hear maybe a little better what the heart is trying to tell us.
Well, there are techniques that are taught in the indigenous traditions, and those techniques have come into the laboratory and been refined by scientists so that we can use them in our living room. So we don't have to go to a monastery, halfway around the world to do these. And they are techniques that shift the awareness, number one, from the mind to the heart. Number two, they shift the breathing. They slow the breathing. And when we slow our breathing, we begin to send a very powerful signal to our body. With a slower breath, we're telling our body that we are safe. And when our body is safe, it begins to release a different kind of chemistry, as we mentioned before. And then the third step is that we begin to create positive, life-affirming emotions like gratitude in the heart, with a focus in the heart. So all of this is focused in the heart. The breathing, the awareness, the attention is all focused in the heart rather than in the brain, in the mind, as most people are trained to think and to create the focus. So the Institute of Heart Math is a pioneering research organization. They're based in Northern California, United States, and they are the ones that have really laid the foundation and done really good science to help us understand this relationship to our heart. They are exploring the power of the heart as much more than a pump. When I was in school back in the 1950s and 1960s, I was taught that the heart is a pump to pump blood through our bodies. And while the heart does pump blood, that may be the least of what it does. The heart does so much more. The heart creates hormones in our body. The heart sends information through the pressure waves in the blood. The heart is sending digital information, electromagnetic information, low frequency information between the heart and the brain and the cells and other organs in the body. Very low frequency, 0.1 hertz is the optimum frequency that harmonizes the heart and the brain together. So all of this is giving us a new way of thinking when it comes to the way we think of ourselves. We are a very sophisticated, technologically advanced technology, a soft technology. Rather than chips and wires and chemicals, we are neurons and blood and membranes moving electromagnetic information through our bodies through consciousness. And when we begin to really get what that means, and we become very, very powerful beings, and it changes our story. This is the new human story now that is emerging.
And what is the source for you of this, all those movements inside us that make us conscious? What would be the source of that energy and that power inside ourselves?
You're asking where our personal power comes from, or you're asking for a reference for the research?
No. The first one. I mean, the source, the energy, the universe, God, whatever.
Sure.
The source.
Well, this is where the science is changing everything, and your part of the world is a big part of that. In Geneva, right there in Geneva, Switzerland, the CERN superconducting supercollider. Scientists have shown us now scientifically what many people believed intuitively, and that is that there is a fundamental field of energy that unites all things in our world and beyond. This field has been with us from the very beginning. It has a lot of different names. And it's interesting, Anne, because a lot of times when people talk about the field, their arm and their hand, they gesture. They say there's a field out there that connects all things, and they gesture away from themselves. What the science is telling us is that we are the field. Every atom in our body right now, this very instant, that is making the molecules and the cells of our bodies, those atoms are emerging from the field and they are collapsing into the field constantly. We are constantly doing this dance, this interaction of where we are emerging and collapsing into the field through what is called quanta. And this is where quantum physics comes from. So when you ask where that power comes from, we are the field. We are disturbances in the field. We are what some scientists call wrinkles in the field held in place by our conscious awareness. And the power that runs through our bodies is the power of the field that we are part of, that surrounds our bodies as well. So this is ultimately where our power, this is where science and spirituality come together. This is where our power comes from. And this is where, when we access our heart information through those neurons are actually communicating with this greater field of energy. And, this is one of those places where science is having a tough time. And because science is not really equipped right now, they could be. But right now, there's a reluctance. They're not equipped with the language that relates consciousness and this field and our human experience. So for science, this is called forbidden territory. It's like when they look at the DNA of the human body and they see that our DNA is the result of a fusion of chromosomes and tweaking of adding and taking away genes in a way that cannot happen under natural conditions. This cannot be something that happens in nature. It has to be done intentionally. And this is another place, forbidden territory for science. Because when we talk about intentionality, underlying human existence, that violates all the principles of science that say we are the product of random processes. We're an accident in biology, and the DNA, our DNA tells us that's not true. So we're at a very powerful crossroad right now where the world is changing, and it's changing in ways that we're not used to, that we've never seen. And for us to be successful in our survival in these changes, whether we're talking about climate change or growing food or social change, the global economies that determine people's lives, all of these, if we're going to be successful in the changes, we have to think and live differently than we ever have in the past to find new and sustainable ways of thinking and living. The science is giving us the reason to do that. But for us to embrace the science means we have to let go of the old story, the story of separation, competition, conflict, struggle, and the story that says we are an accident in the universe, because the data simply doesn't support that.
Greg, if you had, for my last question, just, last message for the world regarding our time of extremes, what would you say? What is your greatest hope today?
Well, that's two questions. Mike, what is my greatest hope, and what would I say? I'm going to say this. There was a poet early in the 20th century. His name was Khalil Gibran. He wrote a very well-known book that was titled The Prophet. And in that book, I come from a very unhealthy, a very dysfunctional family, an abusive alcoholic family. My father was the alcoholic and the abuser. And he left my family when I was 10. And my mother gave me a copy of this book called The Prophet.
Yeah, wow.
And each chapter is very brief, but it has deep wisdom that helps us to live our lives in a good way. And there was a chapter on work. And what Khalil Gibran said that I read when I was 10 years old, and it is the foundation for every moment of every day in my life. He said, work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. And I'm saying that now because it takes a lot of work to change the human story. It takes a lot of work to let go of old ideas that are comfortable and embrace new discoveries that give new meaning to our lives. So the question we're asking ourselves, do we love ourselves enough to embrace those new ideas? Well, that work is our love made visible. I think we're worth it. I think the world is worth that work. And I'm excited to see how we embrace these new ideas with the new world that's emerging. There's a beautiful new world that's emerging but it's not quite there yet because we're still creating it. And if we can use what we now know to be true about ourselves and our relationship to the world, if we can build our new world on those values of love and cooperation, harmony, community, imagination, if those can become the foundation of our new world, I think we can't go wrong.
Well, Gregg Braden, thank you so much for all that beauty. I appreciate very much to hear your words of beauty. I will publish the Khalil Gibran words. I love this book too. Your mother was really inspired to give that book to you at the age of 10, probably.
She was a very strong woman, and I was very, very lucky to have her in my life.
We are thrilled to have you in France in February 2021 for the 3 days of your conference, Human by Design, Level 2. The name of your latest book is This Wisdom Codes, and we can find all the latest information about you on your website, greggbraden.com. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today, Greg. It has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me back, and you let me talk a long time. Thank you for letting me speak so much. I want to thank all of my global family, my global community, our audience for listening, and I look forward to our next time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Greg. We are so happy to have you in France in February 2021 for the 3 days of your conference, Human by Design Level 2. The name of your latest book is The Wisdom Codes, and we can find all the latest information about you on your website, greggbraden.com. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today for the French audience and the American one. Thank you, Greg. It has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Check out the special guest of the week on Instagram at Métamorphose Podcast. If you like this podcast, promote it by giving it 5 stars on Apple Podcast and subscribe to follow all the episodes for free.
Métamorphose. Awaken your consciousness.